Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, and my name is Connor, and my co-host is also here, and his name is Philip.
Good day.
Good day to you. And welcome to all of our beautiful listeners to this latest episode of Heavy Hands, in which we are going to talk about, you know what? Actually, some good fights. I think it took some doing. It took some surviving. But I think we are through our latest dark period of abominable UFC cards. That concluded with last weekend's Apex card, which was, by and large, not good. Not very good. Tatsuro Taira and Alex-Perez in the main event. Alex-Perez has had a remarkable year after being sidelined for so long, and now he's going to be sidelined for at least a year going forward because his knee exploded in that main event fight. Disappointing ending to a disappointing card, though the fight itself was at least interesting while it lasted. We also had last weekend, which I would like to talk a bit about later, a fantastic boxing match between Gervonta Davis, lightweight knockout artist, his name you may have heard before, and Frank Martin, an undefeated prospect, taking him on for Davis's title. And that was a really fascinating and exciting style clash, and a great showcase, I think, of the difference between effective tactics and effective strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, and I'm also going to have a piece about that going up on my Substack. I'll just say that now. But first up, we have to look forward to next weekend's UFC card, which, like the pay-per-view coming up after it, has been ravaged by injuries, but remains, I think, well, I'll say this. It looks like a real fight card.
Well, I mean, notably, this is the one. This is the UFC's second swing at the bat. Because remember that dreadful card back in March, where they tried to put a Saudi card on, and the Saudis were like, no. Our money is not worth this.
Yeah.
Come back with something better. And this is the something better they've come back with. And it's, as you said, it's quite good.
Honestly?
It would have been better with Khamzat at the top of the card, but, you know, that's sort of the risk you take when you book Khamzat, or for that matter, Conor as your headliner.
That's right, yeah. So, as Phil just alluded to, the main event of this card, which is in Saudi Arabia, was supposed to be Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. And instead, because Chimaev got an illness, we have replaced it with, I think, a pretty suitable compromise late notice fill-in. Ikram-Aliskerov has had two impressive wins, albeit over fragile and faded fighters, but still, he has looked very impressive in those fights in the UFC. He is undefeated going back to 2019, it looks like. And he was supposed to fight last weekend on the terrible Apex card. And he was originally booked against Andre Muniz, which was a very good booking. Muniz had to pull out, and so then, to keep him on the card, because these Apex cards all need to have 17 fucking fights for some reason, they booked him against a guy named Antonio Trocoli, who I think had one Contender Series fight and has not fought in the last 3 years or something because of steroid tests. And he's not very good. So it was truly a great example of why the Apex events are so dire, and a waste of a promising fighter like Ikram-Aliskerov. And in that way, it's almost fortunate that Khamzat Chimaev had to withdraw, because while this is not the fight I would ask for, I think it's one of those that is actually probably quite dangerous for Robert Whittaker in comparison to how much it will do for him if he wins. Which I suppose means it's a pretty good fight booking. And it makes much better use of Aliskerov than last weekend's shit show would have. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Aliskerov has basically ping-ponged around the absolute extremes of what the UFC's like middleweight division can offer here. Dracoli is just not very good, and he was an absolutely prohibitive favorite against him, was he not?
Oh yeah,
like
massive.
Like in the thousands kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Like 1600, minus 1600 or something like that.
Yep. And then he goes from that, basically probably one of the worst middleweights on the roster, to like an all-time great middleweight in Robert Whittaker.
Yeah.
And I think, the Muniz fight was one which I feel was probably quite cruelly booked against Andre Muniz, but still would have been interesting to watch.
Yeah.
And still would have been, relevant and meaningful, because Muniz is still very threatening and very scary and so on. But in terms of how he matches up against Ikram Aliskerov, I think it was just a terrible, terrible matchup for him. But this, I think, is... I mean, it probably has to be a step too far.
Probably, yeah.
But yeah, he's still a very exciting fight. But yeah, as you said, I think the main thing I find myself thinking is, like, thank God for Bobby Knuckles.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, this is an absolute trap fight.
Yes. That's what I see too. I mean, yeah, Aliskerov is almost certainly a step too far, but he is very clearly a dangerous fighter. Mm-hmm. He has some of that clutch factor that you and I have been talking about. Just a very dangerous, opportunistic striker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's he's a 4-time world Sambo champion. And that is something that you always have to take account of when you're looking at this kind of stuff. Not necessarily because, you want to count up people's, accolades and try and assume that they're going to be an incredibly comfortable MMA fighter or whatever. But it's simply like, if someone is a champion, or if they've just won a lot, like Makaya, for example, it's just a good idea. It's just a fairly safe proposition. They really know how to win. Like they are, and that they prioritize it a lot. So yeah, I think he's a very, very tough. He's a very, very tough test for Whittaker.
And that's combat sambo, I believe, is his background. To be more specific, which is essentially MMA.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm certainly grateful for Robert Whittaker being willing to take a fight like this, and a little worried for him because, I mean, I was talking about this on Twitter, and somebody, I think very sensibly, was like, they didn't like the booking because they felt it was a trap fight for Robert Whittaker. And I kind of didn't say what I feel, which is, because they phrased it as, it could really just mean he never gets back to the title. And my instinctive response to that was, I'm not sure Robert Whittaker's getting back to the title, to be honest. I think the book might be closed on Robert Whittaker as a champion. I can't even say 100% why I feel that way. I just think that we've seen him getting hurt a lot in his fights. I think we have also seen a lack of focus, which I do not think was present in his run to the middleweight title and going through both of those fights with Yoel Romero. Where, ironclad focus was absolutely necessary just to stay alive. But then you go back and watch fights like the one he had with Jacare Souza. And that is just a cold-blooded, professional, straightforward win. He knows what he's doing the entire time. Since the Romero fights, the Adesanya fights, I feel like we've seen a lot more of Robert Whittaker, not as aggressive as he used to be. And then it creates this sort of awkward marriage between his like safer long range game and the borderline suicidal blitzes, which have always been part of his game, which now seem to happen, I think, from further away more frequently with like less initiative and less pressure to back up these, frankly, like technical mistakes that Robert Whittaker is making when he surges in after people and overcommits. That is what he does. I don't know. Robert Whittaker to me feels like he is probably nearing the end of his title hopes already. So, I mean, which does not make this any... Yeah, what do you think?
This looks less potent now. He's obviously...
Oh, start that sentence over for me. You're turning robotic.
Partially, I think that people in fight his run up to the title, as you said, he was mostly finishing people. He hasn't finished anyone for a very long time. So he has to win decisions. All of his fights are tough. He's getting hurt in almost all of them, meaning that his margins for putting together win streaks are quite thin. And also you can tell that the UFC's promotional lens has shifted away from him.
Yeah.
You can tell that what they want to do with this division is to have fights between Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya.
Yeah.
And hopefully Khamzat Chimaev.
Yeah.
And Robert Whittaker is not really in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure Adesanya is either anymore, to be clear. I think the sort of ends of their title hopes may have weirdly overlapped, being the two, you know.
I mean, they've already rebooked him, haven't they, against Dricus du Plessis?
Yeah, I think so.
Again, a totally winnable fight for him. So, yeah, but as I said, I think Whittaker just isn't going to be put into those kind of situations because there's an understanding that these three are going to do what they did with lightweight for a while. And they're just going to circle around and they'll find different ways for them to fight each other. And they'll probably have close, horrible fights and it will be inconclusive, which will lead to rematches and so on and so forth. And his chances for getting back in are to put lots of fights together and hope that one of them drops out. And as Jared Cannonier found out, that's quite hard to do.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, for example, it was suggested to me that, like, well, he has a favorable matchup with Sean Strickland, which Dricus du Plessis said would be a good title eliminator, you know, assuming he beats Adesanya. Mm-hmm. And I look at that fight and I say, I agree it's a favorable style matchup. How confident am I that this Robert Whittaker actually convincingly beats Sean Strickland? And it's not as much as I would like to be. It's just not as much.
Very few people convincingly beat Sean Strickland.
Yeah. And just...
Sean Strickland also very, very rarely convincingly beats anyone.
It's 100%, yeah. But just like tall guy, you know, like awkward. I just feel like if it was the Whittaker who fought Jacare, he would just pressure him to death. You know, and he would hit every target available. He'd kick his legs. He'd punch the body. And I'm just not sure if that Robert Whittaker really exists anymore. I think he is very much trying to like strike a balance and be a safer, more professional fighter. But we see the results of that in like his fights with Darren Till or the rematch with Adesanya. Which, again, I mean, as I said at the time, I think he has a case for winning that fight, but it's not a decisive performance from either man. It's certainly not from Robert Whittaker. So, I don't know. Yeah, the point being, I fully agree that Whittaker-Aliskerov is a trap fight. I think he's just a very dangerous, solid fighter who's difficult to, he's difficult to shake. I mean, I think he is himself still a young and very focused fighter who, you know, will do weird, janky technical things and make crazy decisions, but he just doesn't seem to get rattled and really relies on some pretty basic like boxing tools to punish people for overextending against him or for standing around in front of him too long or whatever. I just think it's a dangerous matchup for Robert Whittaker. I don't feel as confident in him winning it as I would like.
Okay, so Aliskerov, he is weirdly a little like a Dagestani Robert Whittaker.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
In the sort of construction of his game on the feet, because he is mostly okay. What makes him work is that, like Whittaker, he is incredibly difficult to outgrapple.
Yes.
I think he is one of the only people, maybe the only person I've seen who simply stopped Khamzat Chimaev from taking him down.
Yep.
I don't think I've seen anyone else do that. You know, whether they are, whether it's Kamaru Usman or literally anyone else he's fought in the UFC.
Yeah.
No one has actually just simply takedown defense to stop Khamzat Chimaev. Eventually knocked out by him and whatever, but
he did
again,
just straight up stuffed his takedown attempt.
Yeah, this is an extremely impressive display of counter wrestling.
Yeah.
He's obviously also an extremely good wrestler and grappler himself. He can hit opportunistic takedowns. He's really good in side control. I think Jack Slack has written a bit about how much he likes to go for the Kimura from this position.
Yeah, he's got at least
and he could
3 Kimura finishes on his record.
Mm-hmm. And he can handle himself on the feet as well. And again, much of his work on the feet is the technique that Whittaker often used to sort of make his way up through the ranks, is that it's him having the change up between the jab and the high kick, or in Aliskerov's case, like the step knee. Mm-hmm. Basically the following up the jab with the rear kick. Which makes him, like, as I said, he's not like dissimilar to Whittaker. He's more pared down than the feet, and he's just a little bit more like grappling focused. In general, I do find myself thinking he's stylistically probably not the right person to be beating Robert Whittaker for like a number of reasons. Firstly, that he's just not as he's just not as deep in the pocket as Whittaker is. He's got a good like strafing jab that he works behind, and he sets up his kicks behind that. But once someone's worked in behind that jab, there's not a lot to be offered there. And as Whittaker kind of demonstrated against Paulo Costa, he's perfectly capable of coming in behind his jab and then, countering the counter and having an extended exchange in the pocket.
Yeah.
As well as like chasing people out. Similarly, like Whittaker is one of the people who's going to be able to match or probably beat him for firepower on the feet, and he's standing at range trying to jab and kick with people. As I said, that's also Whittaker's thing, and Whittaker is more powerful and more diverse, much more likely to like go to the legs, go to the body, and so on. And again, as against like Marvin Vittori, if you're just hanging, or Jared Cannonier, if you're just hanging out at mid-range against Robert Whittaker, he's just going to start kicking you up.
Yep.
So yeah, I think both of those things are a sort of, in general, spell trouble for Aliskerov, because his game is built around the assumption that if you're a wrestler, he's simply going to be untakedownable.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you're a striker, he's a good enough and dangerous enough grappler that he can make up any kind of difference, and that he can handle himself on the feet anyway. But I think like Whittaker's mixture of having just like really good takedown defense, very strong anti-grappling with some caveats that we might want to hit, but also just being like incredibly potent and diverse on the feet, makes him in some ways sort of the worst person for Aliskerov to possibly fight.
Yeah, I kind of get that. I am just concerned about the consistency of Robert Whittaker's pace at long range. Like, I know if you just hang around in front of Robert Whittaker, as you said, you're just in middle distance, not doing much, then he is going to find a million ways to confuse you and hit you and set you up with different shots. That's if you're like Jared Cannonier or Kelvin Gastelum. And like you straight up have you straight up have just no idea what you're doing at range. Like, you're either doing nothing or you're sort of like Jared Cannonier often is, kind of confused as to like what your plan is. You're just kind of thinking of things as they come. I think that is where it actually benefits Aliskerov, that he is a pretty simple, as you said, pared down striker. We talked before Costa Strickland about the success that Robert Whittaker had with his jab against Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa also had a ton of success with his jab against Robert Whittaker. It was by far the best part of his performance. That is Aliskerov's punch. I mean, Aliskerov has an excellent jab. Very quick, usually comes from a low angle. And really, really uses it to set up his follow-up strikes. Once he gets past the first follow-up strike, his form is an absolute mess. It's true. But lining people up for a 1-2, finding a way to get them to duck into that knee, that all comes off the jab. And the jab itself is very strong. So I see some potential for him to take advantage of Whittaker sort of laying back more than he probably should. Like, I think like a lot of these recent performances, this is one where it would really benefit Robert Whittaker to put the pressure on Aliskerov and, test what looks like some pretty poor striking defense.
I mean, that is true. Now that I think about it, the difference between between Whittaker's often like horrible fights and his good ones it's when his opponent just like stands still.
Yeah.
And that's true of like Yoel as much as it's true of Kelvin Gastelum and Jared Cannonier and Marvin Vettori. But like people who are mobile, he has actually struggled to like start lining them up for blitzes and start kicking them up.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, that's the Till and the Adesanya fights. And Adesanya, you can be like, fine, it's Israel Adesanya, but Darren Till.
Yeah, I think the height
that's
also
been somewhat forgotten, but that was a very close fight.
Yes, it was. Very close. And a visibly uncomfortable Robert Whittaker. Granted, that was right after the Adesanya KO. We have theorized, I think with good reason, that probably like the frame of the opponent also played a factor, that Robert Whittaker just doesn't like fighting these guys who fight long. I'm not sure what Aliskerov's build is. Let's see. Wikipedia says he's 6 foot, 76 inch reach, 183.
He's about the same size as Whittaker. He doesn't look that big.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that he necessarily fights long as a rule, though he does have that great jab.
Uh-huh.
But still, it's not the only factor in the Till and the Adesanya fights. It's guys who don't stand around and sort of just like waste time letting Robert Whittaker set them up. When Whittaker gets momentum, he is one of the best feinters in the game. He is a very, he can get you with just, I mean, there's a reason like everybody knows he's going to do his jab, shuffle step, high kick move, and it fucking hits everybody all the same. Because he is just excellent at setting people up with feints, getting a read on what positions they go to when they feel threatened, and then disrupting their timing. These really tricky, awkwardly timed entries. But we used to see that, I feel, in a lot of Whittaker fights, no matter what the opponent did, because he was willing to pressure. And that is the thing I think that's missing from current day Robert Whittaker, I don't think he feels particularly comfortable pressuring. I think he feels that it's risky. And so then the result is that the only time you see this side of Robert Whittaker is when the opponent just does nothing and just stands around. If they're active, if they're threatening him, if they're changing angles, then he doesn't really build the initiative with his jabs and his feints and his footwork like he does, like he used to when he was pressuring people. So it's either give him the initiative or, don't. And if you don't, you tend to have, at the very least, a very close fight, like Paulo Costa did. Paulo Costa, who just absolutely shit the bed against Sean Strickland, and despite arguably winning the fight, looked terrible the entire time. Robert Whittaker did not put anything like the pressure on him that Sean Strickland did, and the result was a very close fight. So that's all I'll say. I'm going to pick Robert Whittaker. I tend to agree that the variety of his offense, the fact that he just has a lot more long-range tools, and I don't really know how consistent Aliskerov is as a striker. A lot of his fights that go long are ones where he tends to be out-grappling somebody, whether it's because he takes them down or he stuffs their takedown and then ends up on top. But for as long as this is on the feet, I think Whittaker just has a lot more options available. But I just don't trust Whittaker to take what seems like the best approach, which is just to not let Aliskerov build any momentum at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's... I think when he's been in longer fights, Aliskerov has sort of looked like he's someone that's tended to run out of ideas a little bit.
Yeah.
Said like that, his fight against Narshan Burrell was one where he just, after a while, he was just like, I'm not going to bother striking with this guy anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a pretty pedestrian out wrestling. Yeah, this is definitely one of those fights where Robert Whittaker simply cannot, I don't think he can statistically win, take many fights on this level and expect to keep his title hopes alive.
Yeah.
Because Aliskerov is dangerous enough. And it's the fact that this fight is almost certainly going to be tough. As you said, Aliskerov, he knows how to win. He's lost once to Khamzat.
Yep. One shot KO.
Yeah. And he can fight everywhere. He's clearly dangerous on the feet. He's dangerous on the ground. He can't be out-grappled. He's just someone who's absolutely guaranteed to give a tough fight to Robert Whittaker.
Yeah. And that's another thing
and
we've
at some
seen
point,
from current day Robert Whittaker is it's cool to see him mixing in the wrestling. He's clearly quite good at it. But I think it's pretty obvious that he views it as a mental reprieve.
Yep.
Get a takedown Jesus, that was stressful. And yeah, you just feel Robert Whittaker being stressed in these fights in a way that you didn't, in the first fight with Yoel Romero, he didn't seem that stressed. He was locked in. Ever since the Adesanya fight, or you could argue since those two fights with Romero, which maybe just did a lot of damage and had a huge impact on his style going forward, he has been visibly stressed, even in the fights that he's, some of the fights that he's controlling. That's what I see.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, he just can't have that many fights like this. I mean, you've seen it in his recent record. He had a fight against Dricus du Plessis. He was, again, not particularly good, but all it takes is for one of these, one of these moments where Whittaker gets hurt, which happens in almost every fight, to just translate into a finish.
Yep.
Or, alternatively, he can have a fight like the Till one, and, one knockdown happens that didn't happen in the Till fight, and he lost that fight too.
Yep.
And yeah, so I am picking Robert Whittaker as well. I feel like I sort of have to. But, yeah, tremendously dangerous fight.
Yeah, it's just clearly a high risk, low reward kind of booking. It's worth probably remembering too. We'll probably have a somewhat inflated sense of Aliskerov's potency on the feet because of who he's been fighting. I mean, Robert Whittaker's chin is not what it once was. It's better than Phil Hall's chin.
Yeah, that is very true. Yes. Phil Hawes and Wally Alves.
Yeah, I don't think I'm writing any headlines here when I say that it is better than Phil Hall's chin. So, it's, I don't think the margins are quite as thin as they might have appeared in those two fights, but still, I just think, Aliskerov is clearly just a very well-rounded, dangerous, and, I guess to use a cliche, he just seems like a hungry fighter in the way that Whittaker himself was when he was, having, the fight with, Jacare Souza. That was a very hungry, very focused and determined, fighter that we really haven't seen since his title reign. So, like I said, a pretty cool one. Much as it would break my heart if Robert Whittaker lost, I think it's more or less the best thing you could do for a short notice booking. At least Aliskerov is possibly overtrained, maybe had some difficulty with the weight cut. Who knows? But at least he's had a full camp within a week of this fight taking place. I'm happy for that, and it should be an interesting fight. All right. Well, let's take a break there. When we come back, we haven't fully decided which of these we're going to hit, but I'll just name drop a couple, and maybe we will, in fact, we will likely get a little bit of a bonus episode for the Patreon out of the ones that don't fit on this show. We've got Sergey Pavlovich versus Alexander Volkov in the co-main event. Kelvin Gastelum is taking on D-Rod, Daniel Rodriguez, Johnny Walker, Volkan Oezdemir. I mean, we got to talk about that. And there's some other cool stuff on the undercard, like Rinat Fakhretdinov versus Nicholas Dalby. Even Nasrat Haqparast, Jared Gordon. Which, is that a rematch? Why do I feel like they've fought before? They've never fought before. Yeah, they haven't. Maybe I'm confusing it with the Rafa Garcia fight for Nasrat Haqparast. Mm-hmm. But anyway, some cool stuff throughout this card. It is a pretty blessedly short 4-fight main card, and it is not hurting for that. We're also going to talk, I think, whether this makes it onto this or the bonus episode, about Gervonta Davis, Frank Martin, and we will, of course, revisit Alex Perez, Tatsuro Taira, and maybe talk about one or two other fights very briefly from that dire Apex card last weekend. So all of that, some of that, something after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are now moving on through the Robert Whittaker, Ikram Aliskerov undercard, starting with the co-main event, Sergey Pavlovich versus Alexander Volkov. Sergey Pavlovich has now completed the sort of archetypal heavyweight prospect run, and now he is in the absolute limbo or hell that most of those fighters seem to end up in. What am I talking about, Phil? I'm talking about Chris Daukaus, talking about Tai Tuivasa, talking about, I don't know, maybe Roy Nelson to an extent. There's just a thing where, heavyweights run up the ranks, just blasting their opponents immediately in round one, showing no restraint or understanding of what they're doing or what's happening or where they are, who they are. And then eventually somebody knocks them out. And what happens after is usually not great, but maybe things will be different for Sergey Pavlovich. Anyway, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to say because Sergey Pavlovich could contain multitudes. We've simply never seen them. He just summarily bonked everyone after his loss to Alistair Overeem, and then was bonked in turn himself.
Yeah.
He might have improved a lot.
I would say he
ways.
certainly contains multitudes. In the same way as like a Warcraft 3 abomination.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly appears to contain multitudes of a normal human being's muscles and bones. He's just writhing under the skin.
Very true.
So, who's to say that isn't a spiritual truth as well? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is one of the things that I just hate about heavyweight.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, because this guy is going to come out there and he's going to windmill quite accurate punches at his opponent.
Yeah.
Combined with, like, a surprisingly effective jab.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of them connects well enough, they're going to sleep. You know, there is a parallel reality out there in which, like, Sergei Pavlovich KO'd John Jones.
Sure.
Because he can do that. All he has to do is hit with one of his weird giant hands.
Yep.
Do I think he's going to do that to Alexander Volkov? Don't know. Alexander Volkov is pretty old, although he's actually only 35, which is not actually old at all for a heavyweight, and it's only 3 years older than Pavlovich.
Yeah, he's had a long-ass career, though.
But yeah, he's had a long career of tough fights. And weirdly enough, has only really recently been turning in archetypal heavyweight performances. AKA, like, Volkov has been the one who has been destroying people in, 1-2 rounds lately.
Yeah, it's true.
Since his own loss to Tom Aspinall. And so you just have to ask yourself, like, is Alexander Volkov super vulnerable to getting bonked?
Yeah.
And I guess he's not very good defensively, but then again, literally no one is in this weight class.
No.
If maybe there are a couple of people I would probably pick to be insulated against Pavlovich. I think Rosenstruik would be a particularly poisonous style matchup for him.
Then again, he could just do the Ngannou move and just run Rosenstruik over immediately too. So,
but yeah, Volkov certainly isn't going to be insulated from Pavlovich. On the other hand, Volkov against Rosenstruik was, I think, a good sign because Volkov just immediately crowded him, pushed him into the fence, and Rosenstruik was like, "Oh, I can just evade stuff here and knock people out. I don't need to actually, control the space of the cage or like the directionality of my opponent. I'll just get pushed back to the cage and then knock him out from here." And that obviously didn't happen because he got smoked.
Yeah.
And the fact that Volkov understands that is probably good.
Yeah, I mean, he also...
Because if he can just...
Go on.
I mean, the other part of his approach is obviously just getting into the clinch and wearing people out and being tall and big. I don't see why that wouldn't work on Pavlovich. Admittedly, none of his fights have gone long enough for us to be able to tell whether he's gotten any better in the clinch since Overeem destroyed him with clinch takedowns. But, again, I've got to assume that it's still not an area of strength.
No, it's just a safe assumption with a guy who finishes everyone immediately throwing nothing but power punches that many things are going to go wrong the longer the fight goes. That a great many things will be surprising to him and unexpected. Yeah, I mean, I was going to point out the fact that Volkov did just fight Tai Tuivasa, who I think is not as fast or to the point as Pavlovich. Pavlovich is a horrific combination puncher to watch, but a surprisingly effective one, and he knows that. And he goes in there trying to overwhelm people. in a way that
he also has just a way bigger effective range than Tai Tuivasa.
He's bigger than Tai as well.
But he genuinely has like a quite threatening jab. And he just has big long arms,
built like an orangutan. All he's missing are the cheek flanges. And put a red wig on him, he could pass.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a fight where Volkov was in there against a guy who really just wanted to knock his block off and also to low kick him. And Volkov has enough defensive know-how to not just get hit by one punch outright, even if it means like awkwardly ducking into the clinch, he will do that. And I would say he is insulated against Pavlovich's power better than a lot of heavyweights, just in the fact that he is insanely durable.
Yep.
Volkov, in 47 fights as a heavyweight, he has been knocked out twice, and only one of those is an outright KO. That was the one against Derek Lewis.
Yep.
The other one was a TKO on the ground by Vitaly Minikov, also a very good fighter. But, that's something good, too, to have against Pavlovich, is just the ability to eat a shot. And Volkov can definitely do that. He's probably going to try to kick the body. He's going to do awkward front kicks. He's going to try to grab the clinch. I do have an image in my mind of like Pavlovich storming in, throwing hooks, and Volkov grabs the collar ties and just gets thrown by his own grip, by just the hoss that is Sergei Pavlovich. But I just don't, that's not going to last for long. And however much Volkov has been finishing people quickly lately, I think he is still pretty reliable as a long-term heavyweight fight winner. Because he just doesn't, he doesn't burn a lot of energy. He's very efficient and relaxed. In his footwork and his punches, his kicks, he just doesn't, he doesn't put everything out there the way a guy like Pavlovich does. So I'm very much inclined to take Volkov here.
Yeah, it's like Blades Pavlovich.
Yeah.
You had to pick Blades in that fight. He got knocked out.
Yep.
Again, I sort of have to pick Volkov. If he gets knocked out, I will be not surprised in the slightest.
Yeah, no, it could happen. That's how Pavlovich wins.
Mm-hmm.
He could also just get knocked out. Volkov is not an impotent puncher. He can be quite accurate and is actually a decent counter puncher by heavyweight standards. And that's precisely what happened to Pavlovich against Tom Aspinall. Granted, Aspinall is a freakish athlete in a way that basically no other heavyweights are, but it was Pavlovich just like, what's he going to do except try to overwhelm the guy with his power shots? And he's going to be completely wide open while he does that. Wouldn't shock me if he ducks himself into an uppercut or wings a giant shot, stumbles forward into a straight right hand, or a knee.
Mm-hmm.
I think most likely he probably hits Volkov a decent bit, doesn't put him away, and then slows down. And Volkov just has far better attritive weapons and obviously a much bigger effective range than pretty much any other active heavyweight. So, I'm taking Volkov.
I like the shade against Cyril Gahn there.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't thinking of him.
The active heavyweight. Yeah. I saw what you did there.
It wasn't
subconsciously.
It was subconscious. It wasn't deliberate. So yeah. Solid fight. As far as heavyweight fights go, it's meaningful. It's come back for
and mercifully not 5 rounds.
Yeah.
He says, ?
Beautiful. Oh yeah.
Not actually knowing whether that's true.
Please don't be 5 rounds.
Please don't. Come on.
They've been doing that lately, and generally I like it, but
not for heavyweights.
Oh god, no, there's nothing about it on Wikipedia. I'm so anxious about this. I have to look it up on Tapology to find out. Excuse the typing sounds. Please, 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 please. Okay, it is 3 rounds. Oh, thank Jesus. Thank the good Lord above. It's only 3 rounds.
Alhamdulillah.
That's right. All right. So let's call it there. We'll take a break. When we come back, we had Gervonta Davis, Frank Martin, and Alex Perez versus Tatsuro Taira last weekend. Let's touch on both of those after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk first about Taira-Perez, I suppose. There's not a whole lot to say, but it was a meaningful fight. The guess that we had last week was that it would probably just be too much too soon for Tatsuro Taira, and I think it could have been. Although there were some good signs that I think speak to his genuine efforts to improve. But basically what happened is he and Perez had a close first round. I thought Perez won it. It was one of those fights where commentary was just absolutely fixated on Tatsuro Taira, which is always kind of strange. I don't know, like, Perez was the one like storming after him with combinations and landing some good shots, especially his left hook. Taira had no ability to see it coming and no good answer for it. But commentary was really taken with everything he was doing on the feet. I'm a little more restrictive than that. I was impressed by some of the stuff he did on the feet and very much not impressed by his response to Perez's actual pressure and combinations. But basically what happened is he hit a takedown, he took Alex Perez's back, and then Alex Perez's knee exploded in the second round. So we did not get to see how the struggle would have played out after that.
Yeah, I mean, did anyone actually... What would MMA Decisions had to say? Did anyone actually score that round?
If they've even recorded it. Taira-Perez scorecards. Sometimes you'll see the...
Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, I mean, pretty sure everyone gave that first round to Perez. And yeah, for much the same reasons that we sort of thought it might be the case. That he was...
All three judges did give that round to Perez.
Yeah. He was working the low kicks. As he said, he was landing his... He's just a better instructed boxer on the feet. And yeah, I think it looked like, as you said, like Taira had worked on his boxing, but it just wasn't quite there yet. And, you know, that's sort of what you get when you take someone out of the oven before they're done cooking. But the problem is that obviously that Taira will simply go into a even tougher fight than this, rather than, you know, what he should have been doing is he should have been fighting, essentially doing the Makayev thing and fighting Tim Elliott this time and then Perez next time.
Right.
Whereas now he's just going to be going into, like, contender fights.
I believe he called out Kai Kara-France.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which, hey, he could certainly take Kai Kara-France's back and out-grapple him, but he will also probably get kind of fucked up on the feet until he can make that happen.
Yeah. So yeah, it reminds me of, like, Fiziev Gamrot, where, or even in some ways, the weird finish of Kanonir Imavov, where the guy who won the fight actually did some impressive and noteworthy stuff. I mean, you know, that the knee injury wasn't one of those ones that just completely came out of nowhere. It did happen because Perez was in the process of getting his back taken.
He had his back taken. He was it was Taira. It was pretty novel, actually. Like when he first got, I mean, he just is an amazing back take artist. And And he did successfully take Perez down as well, which is a point in his favor to get to that to that body triangle position. And then he started doing wacky waving inflatable tube man moves to take him down. He was on the body triangle and he was yanking his torso off to one side and then the other, trying to off balance him while grapevining and tangling the legs. And it was just a weird thing where Perez, you could see him, he probably just tried to go strength against strength one time too many. He really tried to resist getting taken down. It put him on one leg, and then there was a horrific amount of torsion on his knee, which I haven't found any details, but I am sure that man tore at least one major ligament in his knee or his meniscus or something, because it didn't look good. Mm-hmm. Even just the position that caused the injury, that twisting, that's usually like an ACL, MCL, LCL tear. But yeah, I mean, it was caused by Taira's effective outgrappling, so it's not like it's nothing. It's just not particularly satisfying either.
Yep. Still a very potent fight. Still obviously improving, but again, probably not improving at the rate that his competition is likely going to demand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll say, just to put a point on it, the things that did impress me in Taira's striking were basically his boxing didn't hold up very well under duress. And so when he was being pressed, when Perez was coming at him with a combination, he pretty much exclusively backpedaled. You could see a couple times he was trying to cut an angle as he saw Perez. Perez wasn't exactly subtle, when he was coming in. It's like bull forward, throw 5 punches. And you could see a couple times Taira trying to find an angle, but it just not in a technical, efficient way. He's trying to both create as much space as possible and get off to the angle at the same time. He does not have the comfort or the technical precision to see that the bull rush is coming and simply to pivot and just let Perez go past. And he had the workaround of the clinch. He was trying to get the collar ties. That was his answer when Perez was overwhelming him, to just get a hand on his head and hit him with some knees. And, that's something. It is an answer. It doesn't exactly solve the problem he was having, but it's an answer. When he was not being pressured, however, I thought Taira did look like he has been working on his boxing. I liked how he was using his jab to create angles and keep Perez at bay, he was actually pivoting, feinting, moving around Perez without moving away from him. I take that as a very good sign. And he also found a couple nice counters when he did start to settle in. In particular, one big right uppercut that he nailed Perez with, as Perez was gearing up to throw a combination at him. So I think there's a clear growth in his striking game. He just looked a lot more consummate. But as you said, it's just it's probably not enough to continue.
Maybe you can just fight Mikhaev next.
Hey, I wouldn't hate that.
That'd
But also, cool. I wouldn't hate
fun grappling. I think
I wouldn't hate a step back or a lateral move for Taira either. Just give him a little more time. He's very young. He shouldn't be in any great rush to get to a title fight right now. Let him fight. I don't know, like Clayton Rodriguez or something. Let him fight somebody he can get some work in on the feet, while still having the option of just mercilessly out-grappling them if he needs to. But he just needs a little more seasoning.
Yep.
The other thing on this card, and I'll only bring it up to illustrate the contrast, because I want to talk about boxing. The only other fight that I even remember. Actually, I take that back. Brady high stand Garrett Armfield was actually quite fun. Bantamweight fight. Brady high stand, a sick jitsu fighter, and boy is he. Because he just sort of flailing around, but ultimately being super, super tough and determined and out-grappling Garrett Armfield, who is just like this close to being like actually a pretty damn good MMA boxer, but it just has some issues. He seems to tire out. He, just could not stop giving up horrific grappling positions and having to play pure defense against high stand. But that was a fun fight and had some nice swings. The only other one that I even remember was the co-main event, Miles Johns versus Johns-Silva de Andrade, alias Douglas De Silva. And that man has been one of my favorite dark horse fighters for a very long time. And as I said to our pal Sriram on Twitter, watching this fight, it looked like he went from being bantamweight Keith Jardine to just sort of being Keith Jardine. And you can't just be Keith Jardine at bantamweight. He really, a guy who has always been super reliant on his physicality, Douglas De Silva. He is now 38 years old. He has been in an assload of wars and fought all the best fighters for a very long time now. And he was in there with Miles Johns, a fight in which basically both guys were only throwing one punch at a time the entire fight. And Johns was simply better at it. He was able to use some switch-ups, feint the jab, throw the left hook. That worked over and over and over on Douglas De Silva. And then this overhand right, straight right, or right uppercut. That was kind of the story of the fight. One shot at a time. And what a dramatic contrast it was to witness that fight immediately after tuning away from the end of Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin. Because that fight was awesome. And it was a boxing match, which meant it was awesome in a very particular way, which doesn't really exist for the most part in MMA, even among the smaller weight classes. Two southpaws using their jabs, combination punching, ring generalship, like a super strong commitment to a very straightforward but very effective strategy from one of the fighters. Like, it was just such a showcase of what boxers are capable of, and to go right from that to Johns De Silva, two guys standing really far apart and throwing one full power punch at a time at each other, made me a little mad at the sport that I spent most of my time talking about. I was a little resentful of MMA in general, immediately after that hard transition. But anyway,
this was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's if people listening aren't aware, Gervonta Davis has been one of the best lightweights in the world for quite a while now. He is I want to say he's now 30-0 or maybe 31-0, and he's got at least 28 knockouts on his record. And his fights tend to follow a very particular form, which is that he gives away the early rounds. But, and this is a great example of this, he doesn't actually give those rounds away. He is not simply burning time, letting the opponent win. He is oftentimes just, gathering information. In this case, sticking very diligently to a game plan, the goal of which was to exhaust his opponent. His opponent being Frank Martin, comparatively a lot less experienced. I think he was 18-0, maybe 18-1 or something coming into this fight. But a very promising fighter, has a wrestling background actually, which you got to see in some of the tie-ups in this fight. He couldn't resist going for some body locks and like a knee pick at one point. The instincts are just there when they collided.
Nice.
But just an excellent athlete who has tremendous speed and so yeah, it was really a battle of differing experience. And I was really struck by how inevitable the ending seemed in a fight where Gervonta Davis really probably lost at least 4 of the first 6 rounds. 3, 4. The ones he might have won were not decisive anyway. So clear rounds going to Frank Martin. And yet, when you take the fight as one process, the fact that Gervonta Davis ends up delivering the knockout and winning in round 8 feels super inevitable because of the strategy he employed. And you just have this feeling watching the entire time. Frank Martin is getting run around the ring, getting trapped in corners, and having to pull like absolute magic tricks sometimes to get out of there. Impressing tactically, showing good counters. I think he really actually troubled Gervonta Davis a lot with his like combination southpaw offense. These are 2 southpaws, and Davis is a pretty strong defensive fighter, but he's almost always fighting non-fellow lefties. And I think there was a pretty clear hitch in his like defensive process due to the speedy southpaw work coming at him. But Martin was moving way too much, was forced to move way too much. He was being made to punch by Gervonta Davis, who just, with almost nothing but footwork in the early rounds, pressured him relentlessly. Literally just walking up on him over and over and over. And Frank Martin kept creating space, and Davis would just devour it and get right back in his face. It was a very heavy pressure and defense forward performance from Gervonta Davis, who said in the post-fight interview, I knew he was going to tire out eventually. The goal was to stay there, be a target for him, make him work to tire him out. Uh-huh. And Davis complemented that with a heavy focus on body punching. And the turn, when it finally happened, was super dramatic. He's dropping all these early rounds. Round 6 starts to shift. Round 7, Frank Martin is basically done. Just because Davis stuck to that strategy so diligently. Martin started to become much more stationary, spending a lot more time just staying in the corners and on the ropes. And he kept coming out at the start of the rounds like, oh, I'm going to convince Gervonta Davis not to keep pressuring me by throwing a bunch of punches. And then he would waste a ton of energy. Davis would just calmly, even sometimes with just a straight up high guard, just let him punch himself out and then get right back to pressuring him. I thought it was a super, super mature performance from Gervonta Davis, and just a great showcase of the importance of having a game plan. Because I don't think Frank Martin had one. Or if he did, it wasn't a good one.
Well, I think Martin did plan to like have a back foot performance where he was drawing Davis onto shots, but I think they said after the fight they just did not want to be on the ropes that much.
No.
And I think that's the difference between a game plan which aligns with like what you want to do as a fighter and one which doesn't. Because it means that you're going to go back to bad habits under pressure.
Yes.
And he said himself that like one thing they really tried to focus on in the camp was not just getting stuck on the ropes, and that happened a lot.
Yep. A lot.
And
even very early it happened quite a bit, but more and more as he started to slow down, for sure.
And honestly, from like a you just want to win these fights kind of perspective, might have been better if he'd actually, if he'd used that wrestling background and clinched up more. Because he really was like...
Yeah.
He was trying to box, sort of honestly box his way out of those situations. Yeah. Rather than just, grabbing and turning Davis.
Yeah. I don't know if...
he might have been better served to do that.
To be honest, though, I actually took note of Davis's own work in the clinches. I thought he was pretty strong there. I don't know if he has any kind of wrestling background, or it's simply the kind of wrestling you learn being a short boxer who presses inside on people a lot. You know, it is an important skill set in boxing. I think vastly underutilized and underappreciated by a lot of modern fighters, but there is a reason that a guy like Terrence Crawford is such an excellent infighter. And some of that is because that man can wrestle. He understands how to position, like head positioning that you see in wrestling and in MMA. That's just an angle. That applies in boxing too. Get into a good head position, looking at the guy's ear when you're in close. It works in boxing, and it's important to be able to do that. And I thought Davis actually did a good job as the fight went on. They did end up in some clinches, and he got good head position, and he got his hands inside and framed Frank Martin off pretty consistently after about round 4. So I'm not even sure the clinching would have really saved Martin, but it would have been some kind of reprieve, at least maybe force a break, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main thing. I don't think it could have won him the fight, but it certainly could have slowed it down a little.
Yeah, that might have helped. But it still would have been physical.
Yeah, the other thing that was very un-MMA was like Martin, you know, they asked like Martin about Davis's power and so on. He was like, I don't think he's that powerful. He's just, well, I didn't feel like it was that much. He's just really accurate. He's really good at setting his shots up and so on.
Yeah.
And that's, again, not the most MMA thing in the world to just be like, oh yeah, this guy's actually just, you know, he's very skillful. The MMA thing would just be to be like, well, he beat me because somehow he was a pussy.
I haven't exactly put it together yet, but that has something to do with it. I'll tell you that.
Or it might have been because the judges were politically biased somehow.
Yeah. Is this guy Mexican by any chance? Yeah, that's very much just the level of understanding displayed by the fighters of what just happened. But yeah, I mean, honestly, even in the clinches, later in the fight, as I said, Martin wasn't even being given breaks. Davis was orchestrating the clinch breaks because he was just get a good head position, get the hands inside, and he would just shove Frank Martin off and break the clinch by force. So even that, I think, would have fit very snugly into Davis's game plan, which was to constantly make Frank Martin work. I think the final numbers, Martin's something like 100 more punches thrown than Gervonta Davis. Yeah. And yet, in terms of punches landed, Davis is right there with him. They're like 2 punches apart in terms of punches landed. And a lot more of Davis's shots were sent to the body, again, fitting very neatly into his overall game plan. And the moment Martin's feet started to slow down, Davis just started putting frightening combinations on him. If you haven't watched this fight, you should at least see the knockout, because it was sickening. Gervonta Davis traps Frank Martin in the corner, forces him to just stand there and shell up, which is a horrible sign. And then I think he throws away a right hook to duck him into a big left uppercut. Surely one of Davis's best punches, if not his best punch. And he's basically just out on his feet when Davis puts him away with a straight left hand. But yeah, just to really, just to see, it's refreshing when you watch a lot of MMA to see somebody stick to a game plan which involves thinking very much long term, leading heavily with defense, and understanding the importance of pressure, even if it is not yielding the immediate like dopamine release of getting to hit the guy with punches. Even hitting his guard with punches, like, feels better to the unseasoned striker than just gobbling up whatever space he creates and making him work really, really hard to get out of the corners and making him punch to try to back you off. And maybe it does back you off, but long term, you're going to go right back to pressuring him, and he's going to break. Very consistent professional showing from Gervonta Davis. Who is a piece of shit, I think, by the way, like in life. I'm pretty sure he's a woman beater. But, hey, it's combat sports.
You can't never expect people to be good.
Nope.
They punch people in the face for a living.
Yep.
Just be happy for the few that seem to be nice guys.
Yeah. And just, you have like your Robert Whittakers, and then you just sort of like, he talks about how excited he is to go see Jordan Peterson speak with his wife as a date, and you just don't think of that ever again. You just forget that happened. Why bother? Why think about that? All right. Well, a decent fight lineup ahead of us. Of course, next week we'll be back to talk maybe just in the form of a bonus episode, depending on how much time we have. But we will talk next week about the results of this Whittaker-Aliskerov card. And then, of course, coming up immediately after that is UFC 303, which no longer features Conor McGregor, now features a fight about which I have very mixed feelings, a rematch between Alex Pereira and Yuri Prochazka, which was made on like 2.5 weeks notice. So God knows what to expect there. But this is at least a half-stacked pay-per-view card, so there will be some other stuff to talk about there next week. Until then, I will advise you once again to check out patreon.com/heavyhands. We are going to have some extra fights that you didn't get to hear in this episode posted up there as a bonus episode. And head over to facepunching.substack.com. I'm doing a write-up of Gervonta Davis and Frank Martin, and I had some computer issues that made it impossible for me to produce my GIFs, but I do in fact have a now heavily delayed write-up about Islam Makhachev, Dustin Poirier, which I'm going to post because I don't want it to go completely to waste. And I may as well just make that one free. So you can read that one this week as well over on facepunching.substack.com. And I think that'll do it for the plugs. Find us on Twitter at EvilGregJackson. That's Phil. At Boxing Bush. That's me. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.